And we're on. Okay. So just to make sure, we're all good with Louisiana Purchase and Lewis and Clark? Any concerns, issues? All right. The election of 1804, 12th Amendment, Aaron Burr, bad dude. Okay? That's it, bad dude. All right. Second term woes we get here. We talked about Jefferson trying to maintain neutrality, yes. Continued British harassment, attacking American shipping, violating American neutrality rights on the high seas, the Chesapeake Leopard affair, emblematic of that problem. The embargo, Jefferson's reaction, some would say overreaction. Why is this the epitome of Jefferson hypocrisy? Yeah. Exactly. He's expanding the role of federal government. He's enforcing an unpopular law that nobody likes. People charge him with being a monarch for acting in this way. And it's kind of like the ultimate hypocrisy. Jefferson campaigning in 1800 as a limited government guy, a strict constructionist, yet this represents expansive government and loose construction. So, this is what really, I think, it turns Jefferson off to the presidency. He could have run for a third term. There was nothing stopping him from running for a third term in 1808. But I think Jefferson was so disgusted by what he had become, by what the presidency had turned him into, that he decided, I've had enough, I'm going back to Monticello. Okay? So, despite the fact that Jefferson and the embargo are unpopular, did we do the election of 1808? Yeah. Madison gets elected. So, that should tell you about the weaknesses of the Federalist Party, that despite the fact that Jefferson and his party were so unpopular because of the embargo, the Democratic Republicans still won in a landslide. And then, did we do non-intercourse? Okay, Jefferson's attempt to tweak. Did we get to Macon's Bill number 2?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Oh, by the way, found out what Macon's Bill number 1 is. I did? Yeah. Oh. Where did we get to? Warhawks. Fantastic. All right. So you've got, let's call him the Osama bin Laden of his day, out in Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, trying to rally all the Native Americans against Western expansion. Now, we have seen this old chestnut play out before. Where have we seen Native Americans trying to band together? Pontiac, absolutely. Little Turtle and the Shawnee Confederacy, defeated by Mad Anthony Wayne. We can go all the way back to King Philip's War in 1676 when they attempted to unify the New England Native Americans. And in each instance, these efforts on the part of Native Americans failed. Tecumseh's a different type of guy, though. Tecumseh is making an appeal, and he is going out, he's visiting tribes, particularly in the southeast. He's saying, look, man, you may not be seeing these people yet, but they're coming. You need to wake up. You need to look at what's happening here. This is 1810, 1811. The cotton gin had been around since 1793. People are just now beginning to enter Mississippi and Alabama for the purpose of planting cotton. And so that floodgate has not opened yet, but Tecumseh's trying to warn the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Seminole, the Creek, the Cherokee, what they call the 5 civilized tribes of the Southeast, that United States expansion onto their territory is coming. And if we don't work together, together to stop it, then we're never going to stop it. This is it. And he's telling them, this is it. Last-ditch attempt. Now, the U.S. government is going to send out William Henry Harrison. We talked about the Battle of Tippecanoe, right? Okay? That this was an incident that, if it had played out the way it was supposed to play out, Harrison would have attacked the Native Americans. But the prophet, looking to impress his brother, decides to attack Harrison first, and you wind up with a battle where the United States could claim to be on the defensive, and it gave them justification to go out after the Native Americans. And when they find Native Americans with British guns and supplies on them, the politicians back in Washington start raising the red flags and saying, whoa, 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 wait a minute. The British are financing, to put it in our own modern parlance, the British are financing terrorists on our own soil? They're backing them up? Because that's really what we're talking about here. To put it in modern terms, the idea of terrorism and a war on terrorism, that's essentially what this is. We're going after elements that are trying to undermine the American government and attack American people for the purpose of effecting a political solution. That's what terrorism is. Now, Native Americans had their reasons for doing this. They did not want their land taken. But from the American perspective, this is a metaphysical threat to national security that must be dealt with. And so not only must the Indians be taken care of, but you also have to take care of the British who are supplying them. And that's why you've got politicians back in Washington clamoring for war. They're called the war hawks. And they are mainly from western and southern states, because that's who's being impacted by these Native American attacks. People in Massachusetts aren't worried about Native American attacks. People in New Hampshire aren't worried about it. People in Rhode Island aren't worried about it. People in Kentucky are. People in Indiana are. People in Ohio are. And Ohio isn't even a state yet. So these guys who are from western and southern states, and by the way, think about it, Kentucky technically is the West at this point. As a matter of fact, Henry Clay, who in 1810 became the Speaker of the House of Representatives, his nickname was Harry of the West. So these politicians who are from the West and the South and are generally of a younger generation, to put it in Kennedy-esque terms, they represent the new generation of Americans. The revolutionary generation is gone. These are the new generation of politicians who are going to lead America into a bright future. These guys had not seen war. They didn't know what war was. They had not been veterans. They had not been injured or killed in battle. So they're eager to go to war. They're ready to go to war to defend America's honor. It's an expression of American nationalism here. We are having our rights infringed upon by the British, who don't respect us. We are an independent country, and they are treating us like we are some red-headed stepchild. These poor red-headed stepchildren wandering around the country. What's happening to these people? Is there a support group for them? So they are eager to go to war with Britain and the Native Americans, and we can take them all on. We'll take all comers to defend American honor. And I really do think that these war hawks pressured Madison. Madison, I think, wanted to avoid war at all costs because Madison is of the Revolutionary generation. I mean, he was a young guy during the American Revolution. He was in his 20s, and he's an older man now. But he understands what war against Great Britain means, and I think he wants to avoid that at all costs. These guys, they don't see that. They just want to defend American honor. So when we declare war, when Madison reluctantly, we declare war on Britain. Britain doesn't declare war on us. We declare war on Great Britain. When Madison reluctantly declares war on Britain, we are totally unprepared for it. We have allowed our military to languish. I mean, there's like 4,000 troops in America's army total. Nobody has any military experience. All the people with military experience are dead. Our Navy has not been built up. I mean, John Adams was the last one to, commission the building of large ships of the line. So the American Navy's been allowed to languish. So we are militarily unprepared for a war against the largest economy, the largest army, and the largest navy in the world. So is it any wonder that 1812, 1813, the war goes very badly for the United States? Yeah. There. And I wrote up here, all of the yellow and red splotches are British victories. How we doing so far? How's that invasion working out for you? There are three main phases of the War of 1812. The first and the most significant phase takes place in Canada. As soon as we declare war, we invade Canada. Didn't we do this during the American Revolution? Believing that the Canadians would, magically side with us. And this should tell you, America's had their eye on Canada for years, drooling over the possibility of Canada becoming a part of the United States. And again, despite the fact that we invade Canada, the United States is losing. All of these are defeats. Fort Dearborn, what today is Chicago. There's a battle there. So in and around the Great Lakes, in and around Canada, 1812 to 1813, there are lots of American losses. The war is becoming especially unpopular because not only are we losing, but the British are blockading American ports. So who is it hurting? The merchants. And where predominantly are the merchant class? The eastern ports, and in particular, the Northeast. So the group that's really opposed to this war are the people who are losing money. These guys. New England, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York. Those people despise this war. As a matter of fact, they disparagingly refer to it as Mr. Madison's War. Mr. Madison was led by the nose by southern and western states into a war that we didn't want. And now look at how it's turning out. We're losing money hand over fist. We're losing battle after battle. Now, every now and then you get a victory. You get a U.S. victory here and there. For instance, this is one of the big victories right here. It's called the Battle of Put-in Bay or the Battle of Lake Erie. Huh? couldn't hear. What?
It has nothing to do with this.
Okay, all right, great, fantastic. I was completely floored by. I didn't understand a word you said. Has anybody ever heard of Oliver Hazard Perry? No. Anybody ever seen the Pennsylvania license plates that have the USS Niagara on them? Yeah, okay. That's the Battle of Put-in Bay, the Battle of Lake Erie. The Americans build a fleet of ships, the British build a fleet of ships, and they battle here on Lake Erie, and the United States miraculously beats the British. Another major U.S. victory, although it doesn't really, it's a big deal. It's called the Battle of the Thames, and at this battle, Tecumseh is killed. He's fighting alongside the British, and he's killed in battle. And then the Battle of York. Today it's the city of Toronto. At the time it was called York. And that wasn't even really a battle. The United States just went into York and burned the town in the middle of the night. Don't worry, the British will get their payback. Huh? When they burn D.C., it's payback for the burning of York. Exactly. The second phase of the war is going to take place here in the Chesapeake, and that's predominantly in 1814. And then the final phase of the war is going to take place down here in 1815 in New Orleans with Andy Jackson. And the ultimate irony of this is that the biggest American victory, the Battle of New Orleans, where Andrew Jackson emerges as a hero, that battle took place after the war was over. The treaty had already been signed, but apparently somebody didn't get the word. All the way down there in the bayou.
Like 8 Americans died and then thousands of British died.
Yeah, and Andy Jackson had cobbled together like this really hodgepodge group of people. I mean, it was like a mix of New Orleans Creoles, Africans, French nationals, some Spanish people that were down there. It was a real motley crew of people that Andy Jackson cobbled together and formed into a successful regiment. And they were outnumbered. They were outnumbered by the British, and Jackson was able to win. I mean, that's what makes him a hero, is, he makes, lemonade out of lemons.
It's a lot of lemonade.
So, the Battle of Lake Erie, one of the rare American victories during the war. 1814, the British invasion. Yeah, baby, yeah! I mean, that's a little outdated. I mean, I was giving an Austin Powers reference. People probably don't even know who. You people were probably just being born when Austin Powers came out. What's that? I know! And my son loves watching it. So, yeah. Yeah, because I'm a bad parent. So please call social services immediately. My son also watches Anchorman and Dodgeball, so, and can quote them. Yeah, my son will be sitting there doing his homework, and he'll be like, "Hey, Daddy, yeah, you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball." Okay, all right, got it. All right, so the British invasion in 1814. Napoleon is defeated in 1814. So Britain, who had basically been fighting America with one hand tied behind its back, is now able to turn all of its attention to America in 1814. And I mean, ultimately, what are wars? But big games of capture the flag, right? So, where's the flag? In D.C. The British believed that if they invade the Chesapeake, capture the capital, that'll be it. End of war, endo story. Get it done. Because think about it, my friends. Britain has been in a state of almost perpetual war since before the American Revolution. The British people do not want this war to drag on any longer than it needs to. So Britain wants to end it in one big move. That's why they attack D.C. That's why they come up the Patuxent. That's why they march through here. Has anybody ever heard of the Battle of Lothian? You guys need to hear about that. I may have to bring in somebody from the local historical society so you guys can hear about that. But you've got battles taking place here. The British and Americans, as the British are invading in 1814. I mean, there's a whole history of Chesapeake battles going on the summer of 1814. So anyway, they march up the Patuxent River. And by August 24th, the British forces are outside D.C. at Bladensburg. Now, these are British soldiers who are veterans of the Napoleonic War. They have been fighting for years. They are expert soldiers. The American soldiers, average age, 18. They are new. They don't know how to fight. They see the British coming towards them. And so what do? Throw their guns and run away! I make light of it, but it is one of the largest retreats in U.S. military history. It's called the Bladensburg Races. Because the Americans literally threw their guns and ran in the face of the British. Now, imagine if you're in Washington, D.C., and the American forces come running through the city. And the only way I can do it is, every year I do this, I have to act it out. And it's not going to be on camera, but... No. We don't need to watch this spectacle. But you're in Washington, D.C., and all of a sudden, you hear... And that's the army defending you. I'd be peeing my pants. As the people of Washington, D.C. no doubt did, when they saw the army that was defending the city running through said city, retreating. So Washington, on the night of August 24th, is left bare. It's left open. The British literally are coming. They're on their way. The people in Washington, D.C. know this, and they evacuate the city. The person who leads the evacuation of the city, no doubt, is the President of the United States. No, he's not there. Where is little Jemmy Madison? All 5'4" of him, 109 pounds. I kid you not, 5'4", 109 pounds. Huh? Yeah, he's 5'4", 109 pounds. He's a waif of a man. He is leading troops where the British ain't. He's out here in, like, the Virginia suburbs. By the way, trivia. James Madison is the last president to ever lead troops in battle as president. So who's it left to save Washington, D.C.'s treasures? his wife. Dolly Madison. Now there's a character for you. You want an interesting character? Read up on her. I mean, again, this is a mile-wide, inch-deep class. We don't have time to get into Dolly Madison, but if you want an interesting, saucy woman, she's it. She's the personality in the White House, not James Madison. James Madison's a cold fish. She's definitely interesting. And even after James Madison dies, she's like showing up at dinner parties uninvited. I mean, she's like showing up at all these cocktail parties and dinner parties and stuff, and everybody's like, "Oh, look, it's Dolly Madison. She's homeless and doesn't have anybody to go home to, and she just shows up at cocktail parties." Dolly Madison was a fixture on the Washington social scene for years after James Madison died, because she had no place else to go. So anyway, Dolly Madison gets the servants in the White House to break down the Gilbert Stuart painting of Washington that hangs in the National Art Gallery, the Hall of Presidents. It's that big one with Washington standing there like this. They get the Declaration of Independence. They get a copy of the Constitution. They get a whole bunch of other artifacts and stuff that represent American history. They load it on a wagon and they get out of Dodge. So the night of August 24th, when the British come into Washington, D.C., they find a city that has been vacated. Nobody there. And there's not much in D.C. anyway. I mean, think about it. After all, the city's only been open for 14 years. There's not much there. There's a White House, a Capitol building, a couple of boarding houses, and a couple of farmhouses, and maybe a house of ill repute here and there. Because after all, what did they do in Washington when they came here? So the British come into the town. Nobody there. They enter the White House. They sit down. Dolly Madison had been ready to host a dinner party that night. There was dinner on the table. Never on a test. Dinner on the table. Major Harry Smith sits down with his men. They eat Dolly Madison's dinner. They break open James Madison's brandy. They sit there, they have some brandy and cigars in the East Room. Think about this. British troops sitting in the East Room of the White House. Huh? They rebuilt it in 1951, yeah. Sat there in the East Room, drinking brandy, smoking cigars, living it up. They turn around, they take the cigars, they light the curtains on fire, and burn the White House, the Capitol, all the buildings in Washington, D.C. are burned. And this is retribution for the burning of York. Now, this should have been the low point. I mean, really, when your Capitol gets burned, that's kind of a low point for you, okay? This is Madison's, well, it's almost Madison's second term. Does anybody know what happened that night? Does anybody ever hear about what happened as Washington is in flames? See if this isn't, and I am no, how do I phrase this right? Let me just tell the story. Washington is in flames. The British are sitting there laughing it up. Ha 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 ha! We burned your city. We burned your capital. A hurricane comes up the Chesapeake Bay. That night, a hurricane comes up the Chesapeake Bay. Huge hurricane that spawns a tornado. The tornado, like the finger of God, goes through downtown Washington, D.C. and extinguishes all the fires, saves all the buildings, disperses the British Army. As a matter of fact, the tornado did more damage to the British Army than the American Army did.
Like, oh.
Huh?
Like, oh.
Yeah. And so it was almost like divine providence. God must be smiling on America, for he reached down with his big spinning wet finger and extinguished all these fires. Or at least that's how it was interpreted by Americans. So, while they did technically take Washington, D.C., it was kind of a Pyrrhic victory. I mean, what did they get from it? Big freaking deal. They burned the White House. You do. The government's still operational. So they're like, all right, fine. Well, we didn't get Washington, D.C., or we didn't do with Washington, D.C. what we wanted to do. So we'll attack Baltimore. Now, you live in Maryland. You should all know the significance of the Battle of Baltimore, the Battle of Fort McHenry, the Star-Spangled Banner, Francis Scott Key. Now look, I mean, we could get into a whole bunch of stuff about the particulars of the Battle of Baltimore, which I guess you could do in Maryland history. I mean, I teach that next semester. And I am going to do something next semester on the Battle of Baltimore, especially with commemoration of the War of 1812. It's the 200th anniversary of it next year. 200th anniversary of the Battle of Baltimore. But the fact that, and if you listen to the Star-Spangled Banner, you know how the battle went. America wins. That signals to the British that their strategy to end the war quickly is not successful. So, the British have a choice to make. Do they want to drag this out, or do they just want to end it? And they make the decision to end it. And by the end of 1814, you get the Treaty of Ghent. Ghent, Belgium. And what they decide in the Treaty of Ghent is this. Nobody wins anything. Nobody loses anything. We go back to the way things were before the war. But America has now stood up to Britain twice and lived to tell the tale. USA! 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 Chalk it up as a victory. Why? Because it wasn't a loss. But really, we didn't get anything from it. Yes.
Were they still funding Native Americans after this?
After this, no. No. And the Native Americans realized, holy crap, Tecumseh's gone and the British are gone. Now, I have a guiding question up here. And this is a question that I have seen as a free response question before. Did the War of 1812 constitute a second American Revolution? Now think about that. How would you define a second American Revolution? I'm going to open that up for conversation. Me talking a lot. How would you define a second American Revolution? How would you characterize it? Yeah, Eric.
Another really significant fast change in America after the war.
Another significant what?
Significant fast change in America after
Okay, so what changes? Yeah.
Breaking free of opposing countries' oppressive nature.
Okay, that's as general as we can get. Okay, can we take it? No, I want to get into this. How would you define a second American Revolution? Yeah.
America's respected more by the world.
Okay, America may be respected more by the world. Maybe a reasserting of the idea of what it means to be an independent country. See, up until this point, a lot of world powers looked at the United States as kind of a wackadoo experiment, some sort of jerkwater berg on the other side of the planet that may or may not be successful. But here, America asserts its independence. Nadi, what were we going to say?
Oh, that America would need a reason to establish a revolution. They would need somebody, another country to be oppressing them first.
Well, wasn't Britain oppressing them? Did America remove oppression? Huh? We're not getting to the point here. We're not really. I mean, think about what the American Revolution was supposed to have done. Does the War of 1812 reinforce or undergird that? Yeah.
Well, in the original revolution, the goal was to return the relationship between the U.S. and Britain to the Saudi authority neglect, where they basically do whatever they want. And after the revolution, they were doing that for a time, and then Britain got in the way again, and they removed that.
Okay,
So
impressment. You could look at impressment. You could look at Jay's Treaty. You could look at the fact that Britain didn't really take us seriously. Does Britain take us seriously after this? Absolutely. How do we know this?
They want to get out of the war.
Well, they want to get out of the war. They negotiate an end to the treaty. They don't stick it to us. They stop funding the Native Americans. They're not impressing us anymore. And there are going to be a whole host of treaties that the United States and Great Britain are going to enter into after the War of 1812 that reinforce this idea of America being taken seriously by not just Britain, but the rest of the world. Yeah. Yes, there is the development of a national pride and identity that you see after the war that you did not see previous to it. People before the War of 1812 referred to these United States. After the War of 1812, they referred to the United States, singular entity. So there's a national unity there. There's a patriotism. There's a pride. There's respect, and there's economic success, believe it or not. Because since we were at war with Britain, where were we getting manufactured goods from? Us. We made them. Yeah. The Battle of New Orleans, the big victory, this huge victory happens after the war is over with, and as a result, Andrew Jackson emerges as a war hero. So like the Revolution and George Washington, you've got the War of 1812 and Andy Jackson emerging as the epitome of military success during the war, even though this battle technically took place after the war was over. And it's not like Andy Jackson stopped at New Orleans. Oh no. He launched his own private little invasion of Florida without being given permission to do so. Madison told Jackson to stand down, and Jackson ignored him. Jackson went into Florida to attack the Seminole Indians there who were giving refuge to escaped slaves. And Jackson wanted to end Florida as a haven for escaped slaves once and for all. So that's why he invades Florida. Not only does he invade Florida and go after the Seminoles, he also executes a number of Spanish officials in Florida. And this is Spanish territory. So Jackson's on the verge of creating an international incident right here. But it shows how popular Jackson is. What Jackson is doing in the South is very popular because Florida was seen as a big problem for slave owners. It was a place where escaped slaves were going to escape slavery. Here's another after effect of the War of 1812. The Federalist Party is dead. Why? Because they came out in opposition to a war that we won. So they looked like defeatists. Where is Federalist center of power? It's in New England. The New Englanders had opposed the War of 1812 on the principle that they were losing money. And during the war, Federalists in New England actually were siding with the British in order to trade with the British and make money. So Americans were more worried about making money than they were about nationalism and patriotism. Yeah. Huh? They did the same thing during the American Revolution too. And what they used to do, they were called blue light Federalists. What they used to do is they would use different colored lights to warn the British blockade when American ships were on patrol. So you had Americans sending signals to the British, the enemy, that the government, that American forces were nearby, so that they could make money. So when the Federalist Party gets together in Hartford, Connecticut in 1815, they come up with a number of proposals. One, they want to limit the presidential term to 1 6-year term. So they want to place term limits on the president because they believe the president has too much power. Two, they want to limit the president and where he can be from. They don't want 2 presidents in a row from the same state. Why? Where was Washington from? Where was Jefferson from? Where was Madison from? They wanted to end the lock of Virginia on the presidency. And they wanted to make it harder for the United States to go to war. I think they wanted to make it a 3/4 vote to go to war. And so, guys, don't you recognize the irony of all this? The Federalists want to limit the power of the federal government because they believe the Democratic Republicans are out of control and loosely interpreting the Constitution.
What?
Exactly! They've flipped. But because and this takes place in 1815, when the war is over, so these guys look like defeatists. And so basically, if you're a Federalist, you were a traitor. The last Federalist to run for president ran in 1816. That's the last time you see a Federalist run for president. To call yourself a Federalist, you might as well be calling yourself a Nazi communist. That's how bad a term federalism became in 1815, 1816. Newfound American respect, Britain signing treaties, Americans, lots of nationalism and pride. Other nations react positively. Guys, the War of 1812 gets other countries to take us seriously in a way they had not previously done prior to the American after the American Revolution. I got to move here. So what are the treaties that are signed? The first one is called the Rush-Bagot Treaty, and that is 1817. And what that does is it demilitarizes the Great Lakes. It actually demilitarizes the U.S.-Canadian border. To this day, it is the largest demilitarized border in the world. You remove your armies and navies. There's border patrol. I mean, there's I mean, what do we got up there today? Like TSA, or I mean, what do we have? Border patrol, or I don't know. But we don't have guns on the U.S.-Canadian border at all. So demilitarizing the Great Lakes, that's progress, that's positive, that ratchets down tensions with the Americans and British. The next treaty is called, I know, how clever, the Treaty of 1818, or the Convention of 1818, and that does two things. One, it establishes the northern boundary of the Louisiana Purchase at the 49th parallel. So when we bought Louisiana and we didn't know what we had gotten, now we're defining what we've got. And we're saying that the northern boundary of the Louisiana Purchase is the 49th parallel. Yeah, but what about Oregon? The U.S. and Great Britain in the Treaty of 1818 agreed to jointly occupy Oregon for 10 years. Whoever's got a better claim on it after 10 years gets it. That's why you have the Oregon Trail, because the government is encouraging people to move out to Oregon, so we've got a better claim on that territory. So we get it. The next treaty, which is actually after Madison leaves office, and now you've got President James Monroe, the Adams-Onis Treaty. And what that does, and that does two things. One, it establishes the southwestern border of the Louisiana Territory. So when Zebulon Pike had been circling around out here and made claims that this was part of Louisiana, we give back Texas, our claims in Texas, we give that back to Spain, we establish the southwestern border, and we buy Florida. What happens in Latin America starting in 1820, going through 1821, 22, 23? Revolutions! Most of the countries that are under Spanish control in Latin America, from Mexico all the way down to Tierra del Fuego, are going to rise up against Spanish control and declare their independence. Anybody know who the leader of that movement was? The George Washington of Latin America? Simón Bolívar. He is going to lead revolutions throughout Latin America. And all of these countries between 1820 and 1823, from Mexico down to Argentina, are going to become independent countries. Brand new countries. Countries the United States can trade with, make money off of. Oh yeah, baby. So, at the end of that independence movement, where Spain is essentially removed from the Western Hemisphere, the United States issues what I consider to be one of the most audacious proclamations ever. That is the ultimate expression of American power and influence in the Western Hemisphere. From a country that was not taken seriously in 1812 to a country that says, yeah, we've got that. The Monroe Doctrine is a statement of policy to keep European powers out of the Western Hemisphere, because we are protecting these newly independent countries from other European influence. And yes, we say it's for democracy and freedom and liberty, but really, folks, it's because we want to have a monopoly on trade. And what do these guys produce? Sugar, chocolate, coffee, bananas, fruit of all kinds, and we want it. You think I'm lying? We're going to come back and we're going to revisit this Latin American policy for the next 100 years. And by the way, who's the United States to say that we can do this? I mean, we don't have a Navy to speak of. Who's backing us up? The British Navy. The Monroe Doctrine is a joint declaration between the United States and Great Britain. We used to be enemies. We are now partners, business partners, because we are going to make billions off of the sugar and chocolate and coffee industry. Oh yeah, and freedom and liberty and all that happy horse crap. Question. So America asserts itself as the dominant power in the Western Hemisphere. Yeah.
Why did Britain back us up on that?
Because they wanted to make money too.
So they were allowed to trade?
Oh yeah. Yeah, Britain, yeah, America, yeah, anybody else? Yeah, they could trade, but they could not come in and so for instance, Mexico declared its independence in 1822. France could not come in and take over Mexico as a colony. Well, it's not ours, although there are people in Latin America who believe that America just is like this big brother from the north that just stomps all around. And really, talk to some Latin American. I've talked to Latin American. I've talked to an ambassador from Uruguay when I was in grad school. But the perception of Latin Americans towards the United States is that the United States just doesn't give a crap about Latin America and will just do whatever it wants.
Good morning, Southern. Today is Wednesday, November 13th, Happy Day. Please stand for your pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Interact Club will be meeting on Thursday morning during Bulldog Block in room D109. Interact is a club for students interested in working on community service projects. These activities help others in South County and also focus on helping other countries around the world. On Thursday this week, Interact members are asked to bring a friend and we'll be discussing our first project, Backpack Buddies, for students at Ocean and Shadyside Elementary Schools. Remember, Interact Club will be meeting on Thursday morning.
Actually, just if we can hold on, that'd be great.
New members are welcome.
Guys,
Do you want to stand out to college?
I am going to talk over this real quick because I do want to make mention of it, but I'm going to get into more detail when we get into the next unit. There is another result of the War of 1812.
If you want to be part of a totally awesome group, if you said yes to any of these questions that come to
this idea of American economic independence, that we don't have to rely on England or any other European power for our economic prosperity. The War of 1812 and the fact that we couldn't trade really with the rest of the world forced America to develop its own industries. In particular, the textile industry grew during the War of 1812 because we couldn't import textiles from outside the country. At the end of the war, politicians decided that they wanted to put in place a plan that would promote American economic independence. It was promoted
Next Tuesday, November 19th, we will be
by Henry Clay, and it was called
F208 for next Tuesday. You must sign up if you want to.
the American System, and it was made up of 3 parts. First, the Bank of the United States would be rechartered. The bank had been allowed to lapse in 1811. In 1816, they're going to recharter the Bank of the United States. It's called the Second Bank of the United States. So it's a 20-year charter, so it's going to last from 1816 to 1836. Second,
November 14th from 4 to 9 p.m. Make sure you tell the cashier Southern, muy delicioso.
Second, we're going to put in place a protective tariff. You put a tax on imports to make imports artificially more expensive so that people will do what? Buy American. Okay? They're trying to encourage Americans to buy American-made goods. So you put a protective tariff on imports so that people will buy the cheaper American goods. And the final component.
Does recycling just one aluminum can save? If you think you know the answer, stop by the media center before the end of school. Answer correctly and you can win a candy bar. Please remember to recycle the wrapper. Winner of school will be announced on Friday.
Federally funded internal improvements. Henry Clay proposed that the federal government should build a system of roads and canals that interconnected the entire country to be able to easily move products and people all around. Now that was a debatable thing. And this was called the bonus bill, and it was vetoed. But the rest of this was put in place. All right, guys, there's a test next class. I also am going to collect the Madison and War of 1812 top 10 then, too.